today's episode of Vader Down, we catch up with the Chief Executive Officer of Aetna Better Health of Florida, Jennifer Sweet. Jennifer has a deep understanding in the payer side of healthcare, where she has served in various roles from compliance officer and chief operating officer at Integral Health Plan under Aetna, as well as the head of Medicaid segment under Florida Blue. What is a veneer of confidence and how do you cultivate it? How do you find your way to a passion-filled career? Listen to Jennifer's journey and find these answers and more. Don't forget to hit subscribe and join our community, where you will get access to resources such as these videos where we are interviewing women and hearing about how they are sending the elevator back down. Today, I'm meeting with Jennifer Sweet. She is currently the CEO of Aetna Better Health of Florida. Jennifer and I met a few years ago while doing our executive MBA together at the University of Miami, and I had the pleasure of getting to know her throughout our time in the program. As I got to know her, I was really encouraged by her leadership style as a woman in an executive role in the healthcare space. And I look forward to getting you to get to know her today and see a little bit of what I've experienced of Jennifer. So welcome, Jennifer. How are you doing today?
I'm very well. How are you, Deidre? Thank you so much for having me.
I'm doing well. Thank you for joining us. Let's just start by getting to know you a little bit more. If you could give us an overview of your career and what your climb to your current position has looked like.
Sure. So Aetna Better Health of Florida is a managed care company, and we manage the care for Medicaid recipients in Florida. I've been doing that for about 10 years. And prior to that, I was in health insurance for almost another 10 years. I took a circuitous path to get there, though, I have to say. So my entire sort of post-college life wasn't a march towards this career point. I, dabbled in other things and otherwise had adventures that had nothing to do with work. But once I landed in health insurance and realized, as unglamorous as I perceived it to be prior to that, I really enjoyed the complexity and the problem solving of the work. And when I found the Medicaid aspect of the business, I really just, went on fire with how interesting it was and how much I wanted to be engaged in that. So having once found it and had my fire lit, so to speak, it was really just a matter of putting in my time learning and wanting to achieve things that made real contributions to that population and to the companies that serve that population. Eventually, it led me to a leadership post. I wasn't necessarily focused on climbing a ladder in that regard, but that's how I got here. It was sheer passion for the work I was doing.
Great. So did you have an experience in your career where maybe someone gave you an opportunity that at that point in time you didn't have a lot of prior experience that really prepared you for that role? And, if so, can you tell us about that?
Yeah, that's an interesting question because it goes to sort of the philosophy of hiring in some ways. Before I found health insurance, I was teaching political science at the University of Connecticut. And I was introduced to, a summer job in health insurance, and that's how I found it. And when I realized I was interested in that, I tried to get a full-time position and leave teaching. And I was lucky in that a woman hired me because she said, "You have no experience, but you're smart and you will learn it." And as I got through successive jobs, I realized there really are a couple different types of hiring managers. Those who won't even look at you if you don't have precisely the experience they need. And those who are really open-minded to, wow, creative, talented, whatever, let's take a chance on that person. And, it varies on the spectrum. But I was very lucky to find what I think is the minority, someone who will take a chance on you because they think that who you are as a person, your skills, your curiosity, your particular education, not so much your experience in a specific job will eventually reap what the boss wants in that position. So I was very fortunate in that. And as I've gone on and built teams, I've recognized that sometimes there's an opportunity to do that, and sometimes you absolutely do need, just that hard-hitting experience to fill a role. I always try to mix it up so that you have, you know, fresh eyes in the game right alongside the people with the most experience. So, but that was a gift to me because it really launched what I consider a very satisfying work life.
Absolutely. I think hearing your story, one of the key things that stands out already to me is you found something you're really passionate about. And a lot of us struggle with, especially earlier in our careers, even coming out of college. How do I find my passion? When you start even in college, right? You're 18, 19, 20 years old. How do I know what I want to do for the rest of my life? And so looking back on your journey, was there a key maybe step or thing that happened that helped lead you to finding your passion, which ended up being your career path?
Well, I think one of the first things I'd say is don't focus on the word passion. The word passion is so monumental. It's like making a life decision. I don't know. Those can just be, paralyzing when you think in those terms. But if you watch what you choose to do every day, the activities that you opt into when you have your free time, and then even those that you don't opt into but you have to do for work, what parts of those activities give you energy, make you feel like, oh, that was fun, or you find yourself getting into the flow, the expression where you're just all in on a task. I would say just latch onto those, understand what it is about certain activities that energize you or that you choose to do over and over again, and say, what is it about those that I like? And that ends up answering the passion question for you rather than, coming at it with that big monumental word passion. And that's really what happened to me. It wasn't as if I said, this is my passion. It's just, I enjoyed the small problem solving of it. It was very satisfying on an intellectual basis. And as I got increasingly more responsibility and saw my impact across an organization, then you take satisfaction from that too. But it's really just a series of small steps that get you there. And so you have to listen to the small cues that you give yourself.
No, that's great advice, and I'm sure helps make it feel less overwhelming for those that might be listening of, you don't have to figure out your kind of one big mantra, right? It's just one day and one step at a time, and hopefully we'll
Exactly
get there. So
yeah.
Let's talk a little bit about women in the workplace. So have you witnessed what I'll call kind of the good old boy relationships at work? Maybe tell us a little bit about your perspective and what you've experienced.
As you know, in health insurance, there really are an awful lot of women. And so I can't say that I've come head to head with that in a serious way in my current position. And there are a lot of women in leadership roles in healthcare too. So I just don't, I mean, I've been lucky. I don't see a lot of that, but I have experienced that in other venues. And I have been in leadership roles on a volunteer situation for many years at one foundation. And for probably 15 years, I was the only woman on the leadership team there. And while I loved all my colleagues and loved the work we did, it was very clear that they regarded me as somewhat secondary status. It was just, I think, partly a generational thing, partly a ego thing. And I used to get really wound up about it because it's insulting. It's insulting and it's insidious. And you just think, what am I doing here? Like, why am I putting myself through this? Well, the answer is I liked the work and I felt like I wanted to put my energy into what that was about, but I had to get my head around that. I was never going to change those people. I had to make sure they knew what my contribution was, and I had to do it in a way that wasn't threatening to them. You kind of have to figure these things out as you go, because I think it's different in every situation with every person. And I think the thing is not to set up a goal of changing anyone's mind, but really just figuring out how you're going to deal with the fact that they have this mindset. And as long as it doesn't truly block an opportunity you want, then you're okay. Then you probably don't need a lot of remediation. When you hit against a situation where you have somebody blocking you, and that can be a man or a woman, that does not have to be a gender-based situation. That's a much more difficult problem to solve. And I don't think that's the essence of your question, really. But in terms of the old boy network, I think it's changing ever so slowly. And I think we've been given the right to at least call people on it. And that's very helpful. But I would be very careful about how to do it, because there's almost nothing to be gained in interpersonal relationships by putting people on the defensive. So, you're going to have to be very careful about how you're calling people on, whether they're being, chauvinistic or
right
in the environment you're working in.
Now, from a woman perspective in the workplace, have you seen similar behavior, or what I'll call a good old girl, kind of relationship or network? Or have you seen a lot of women kind of bringing other women along in your experience?
Well, as I said, there are a lot of women in healthcare, and I have at times wondered, especially in the sort of, the big staff ranks, men are not as well represented as women. They're in the minority by a lot. And I've often wondered what their experience is. Like, is there a girl thing going on that makes them uncomfortable? But I never actually witnessed it. So I'm not sure there is. And I also see that the men often rise. And I don't know if that's because women defer to men or what the dynamic is. I'm not actually working in that, so I can't really tell, but I've watched it. I think the bigger problem is one of human nature, where you can find yourself in a group that isn't inclined to be inclusive. There's always the other, whether it's another department or another, business that you're competing against. You sort of set up the dynamic of the other. And sometimes that good, it spurs competition and it gets people motivated. It gives you something to focus on and drive toward. But it's the other side of that coin is that it's an exclusionary principle. And so if you can moderate inclusiveness in the groups you're working in, you're going to bring along people, whether they are male or female, and you'll be quashing that dynamic in a way that I think is positive for everyone. So that's probably not a satisfying answer to you, but that's been my experience. I have not been able to think about that on a purely gender basis. It hasn't been my experience to see it that way, and I have never had to sort of deal with it specifically.
If you could change one thing about women in the business setting where we sit today, what would that be and why?
One of my epiphany moments was that, confidence is the currency of the business world. And whether it's because it's a female thing or just a me thing, I always felt like I needed to know more or have more experience before I could feel confident and display confidence. Like, there seemed to be an arrogance in my mind that I didn't want to display confidence before I truly felt it. And I don't know how I landed in that place, but that's not a good place to be. I think that women could be well served to know that cultivating a veneer of confidence is one of the most important skills you can have. And when I put it that way, what I mean is, of course, when you're starting something, you're not fully confident. If you don't have the skills yet, if you're at the beginning, if you're green, nobody walks in full of confidence. I mean, if you do, that's a problem too, right? That is arrogance. But you have to always have the veneer of confidence because you know in yourself that you can figure things out, that you can recover from missteps, that you can learn effectively, that you can adapt to what this particular situation is handing you. And so all of those things, once you recognize them, those things give you the veneer of confidence to always have in front of you when you're in a business environment. And I think, people often point to how men have so much more confidence. I think that's part of that game. And women see men having that confidence and they say, I don't have that confidence. But you know what? You do have that confidence. You just have not cultivated that veneer of confidence that comes from who you are, not what you know in this minute, not the experience you had that brought you into this room. And that sense of you belong at the table because of who you are, not because of, some title or some experience. So that would be the biggest thing I would recommend for women to think about and to recognize if they're feeling that deficiency, to then just go ahead and cultivate it, because that's what it is. It's a veneer. Everyone has it.
Looking back on your experience specifically, were you vocal, to your boss or your leadership of, this is where I want to go, along the way in your career? Or was it more them kind of coming to you and saying, Jennifer, I think you'd be great in this role, or, kind of them more leading you in that direction?
No, once I knew what I wanted, it was me. It was driven by me. I, in fact, often did the job before I got it, so to speak. And I think that's good advice, actually. If you're in a position to do that, just start doing what you want to do, what the job you want to be promoted into. Just start doing it. It's really not that hard. I mean, it calls upon your skills not to be stepping on toes and things like that, but usually you can figure out a way to do it. So I would say in my life, that's how I got it. And what I learned along the way with that is, one, your bosses, the ones who would bestow on you these positions, they often don't even think that much about it. They're not thinking that much about you. All they want to do is solve their own problems. So by, in fact, starting to do it, you're solving their problems, and you're saying basically, hey, I'm here, I'm solving your problem. And if they still don't give you the job, that's a different problem. You've got to go fight for it, right? And you've got to say, I'm already doing it. Don't give it to the guy who sits next to me, who's, for whatever reason seems to be who, you think should have the job. But no, I have fought for them every step of the way. And I've even come up against, people saying, well, I don't think you're quite ready. And I'll be like, I think you're wrong. I just think you're wrong. And I've been lucky in that people have taken the chance on me when I've had to point that out. So.
Another great tip of advice: start doing the role as much as you can before you're even given the role, because that'll help the argument of, well, I don't think you're ready. Well, here's all the things I have been doing that, yes, informally, maybe I haven't done the role fully, but I am doing a lot of things to help prepare me for that. So I think that's.
If I could add one more thing, I think it's important that even if you're not in a position to do the role, what you always want to be cognizant of is when you have a boss, somebody who can promote you, or, if not to new positions, to bigger assignments and things like that, never be very cognizant of how you are working with that boss. And I have employees who, whenever they deal with me, it's almost like they're giving me work to do. Well, what do you want me to do about this? Or weren't we supposed to get this yesterday? And it's like, what, do you want me to stop and go look that up? I mean, I know they mean well, and part of it is a demonstration of their diligence. But if you are that person Do not make work for your boss. Do everything you can to solve the problem, to make your boss's life easier. And trust me, that is a faster way to a promotion than being the person who, by some misguided sense, is always sort of putting some burden, small burden, but it's like, yeah.
Completely agree. I always look at when I'm looking to promote someone, that person, when they do come to me, it's okay, here's the problem. Here's how I plan to solve it. Are you good with this, Deidre? Can you sign off on this?
Exactly.
And usually, we might have some good, healthy discussion and debate around sometimes, hopefully a lot of times we're aligned on how they're going to go about doing it, but, and then they just, take care of it. And so,
yeah.
So what do you know now that you wish you knew back when you started your career?
I would go back to that veneer of confidence thing, because I can remember being in so many rooms where I was really interested in something, and I had, I had thoughtful reactions to things, but I didn't feel as if I necessarily belonged enough to speak those reactions, and that was just wrong, because I look back at them and I can even remember the thinking, and I thought those would have been good contributions. And at the time, I didn't have the context to know that. Now I know that. But what I was lacking was that veneer of confidence that I belong there, that I'm listening to this, and that my reactions will count for something, that they are my unique reactions. No one else is going to have those reactions. So why not give them? Probably that's a very gender-based thing, but that did take me a while to learn, and that's absolutely the lesson I would give to my younger self.
Yeah, and even if your contributions are, especially earlier in your career, maybe they're not right, or maybe they're not the right direction, but I think there's certain people also will credit you for just being bold enough to speak up, as long as your idea is not like completely outlandish and off the railroad tracks, right? But being in
right.
Having that confidence to kind of own the room and speak up and give an opinion is, I think, part of it as well. As you gain that experience more and more time again, hopefully your contribution will be more and more meaningful too.
Well, and I like your expression, own the room. For the minute you're talking, you own the room. And often what people remember after the fact is the fact that you spoke up at all, not what you said. And even if you said the most brilliant thing, that doesn't mean they heard it, but the fact is, if you say nothing, they don't remember you at all. So
absolutely.
Yeah.
So you've talked a lot about confidence. Definitely hear you on that's a skill that you encourage all women to harness. What other key skills would you encourage them to really work on if they aspire to be you one day?
Communication, you cannot underestimate communication. And what feeds communication is not so much, can you write clearly and persuasively? That's important. But it's also understanding your audience, understanding the human experience in whatever context you're dealing with. So it's such a multi-focused skill that you can never be good enough at. And I would say that is the chief thing you need as a leader. You need to know how to communicate to serve your goals, to foment productivity, to bring people along when you need to be persuasive about something. So if you have any doubts at all about your ability to communicate clearly, fairly, without being misunderstood, without sounding too aggressive, without, acclimating the message to the audience. If you have any doubts about any of those things, then just get to work on them. Practice, deal with others, get reactions from people. Nobody's perfect at that. that takes a lot of skill, and it takes a lot of, you learn to adapt to different contexts with your communication, and you learn to more intuitively understand your audience, but it's something you always have to be working on. So that would be the number one thing I would say. And that's not just one narrow skill. That is an all-encompassing skill.
Yeah, absolutely agree. Communication is huge, and it's a lifelong journey to tailor that for sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
So you're a CEO. Obviously, there's a lot of stress that comes with your role. How do you deal with it on a day in, day out basis?
People assume there's a lot of stress. I think if you're in a role that you find particularly stressful, it might not be the job for you, because, I mean, who wants to live with bad stress? Now, if we're using the word stress as sort of anything that energizes you, yes, the job energizes me because I like solving these problems, but I do not find making big decisions particularly stressful. But to answer the question, how do I manage stress? Because sometimes you have to get more done than you have time for. That's stressful. I really, really drive my calendar. I curate my calendar very carefully, because I know myself well enough to know when do I need the time to thoughtfully do something. And when do I need just a little bit of time just to get it done, check the box, get it done. And so I am very careful about my calendar. I do not let my calendar drive me. In fact, my admin, lots of people have their admins run their whole calendar. I am tied at the hip with her about this, because I am obsessive about having my time be spent the way I want it to. And when other people use your time to barter in their jobs, you never win. It's very hard to win in those situations. So that would be some advice, is to be very careful about your time. And when you know something very stressful is coming up, build the time in to do it. And if you can't, you have to recognize that you're about to have a very stressful time and figure out how you're going to deal with it. So, as I'm hearing myself talk, I'm realizing that the answer to your question is really about self-awareness. You have to know yourself, and you've got to face that head on, and you've got to deal with it.
Right. So I'm going to ask you a little more personal question in regards to just investing. Do you have any advice to women, from your experience around, personal and what you've invested through the years?
I would say, because I wasn't always feeling motivated by money, I was often motivated by adventure and other things. I probably didn't think about money as a thing unto itself. And my advice would be to women, if you find that you're at all reticent about money, or dismissive about money, or even fearful of money, maybe you shy away from, roles that involve money because for whatever reason, first of all, recognize that about yourself, and then realize that money is no more or less important than time, right? And I would say time is, right up there with the most important things. Love, time, and therefore, because time and money are so equivalent, you've really got to embrace and learn money. And when I say learn money, that's as much learning your own priorities for life, and then understanding them, and then making decisions around those priorities. So we hear a lot about how women are fearful of money or intimidated by money. I don't know if that's a stereotype. I don't know if it's true. But if that is true, I say just face it and learn it and move on. Money is not some thing, it is an integral part of your life the way time is. And you've just got to decide how you're going to deal with it.
Goes back to one of the infamous sayings of time is money, right?
Yeah. You know what? I wasn't even thinking that, but you're right. You're absolutely right. A lot of wisdom in that. Yep.
So Jennifer, looking back on your journey, have you been more risk adverse or risk tolerant? And how has that and ultimately affected your path?
I haven't had a linear path. And so it feels as if I've taken what other people would perceive as risk. And so, for example, when I was teaching, when I jumped over to insurance, right? And that's a pretty monumental change. And even before I was teaching, I was doing something else because I was pursuing all these things I was interested in. And I was really genuinely interested at the time. And there was nothing else I would rather be doing. And then you throw in the mix the fact that, there were children I was raising in my life. And that's a really monumental endeavor that I never wanted to shortchange. So there are all these competing things, and I just never, I didn't take a linear path, and so it never felt like I was taking risks. So I don't know how to think of that in terms of a career risk. I think that to our earlier comments, I know when it's time for me to move off of something, because I just know. And so it's not a risk to leave, it's a risk to stay. And so I don't feel like I'm a particular risk taker. I feel like I just know myself and try to follow that guidance. Will I take a job that was the wrong decision? I've done that twice in my life. And twice in my life, I've quit fairly quickly. The first time I did it too quickly, I said, this isn't right for me, I'm moving on. And I learned a lot from that. I didn't regret doing it, but I learned a lot about doing it that way. And the second time I took it more slowly and purposefully, and it was a better end result. But either way, as soon as I was in the door, I was already marching out the door, and I knew it. So, you're going to make mistakes. Nothing's perfect. So you just have to do it. You have to know yourself. You have to make the decision what you think is good. And you always have to do that, knowing that you're going to recover from whatever mistake you might make. The bigger risk is not doing things. I mean, that's an old adage too, right? You don't regret the things you've done. You regret the things that maybe you didn't do. So
yes, definitely. So the name Vader Down comes from the saying, sending the elevator back down. And that's really the inspiration and vision for what we're trying to achieve within Vader Down. So what does that mean to you when I say send the elevator back down?
What it means to me is that you're going to help somebody lift up towards something they want to achieve. And what I've witnessed is that the people I admire most are the people who are very generous on a day-to-day basis, really as a life attitude. Generous with their time, generous with their advice, generous giving recommendations, generous referring people to others for whatever. And I aspire to be like that. I try to be like that. I think that's the best way to be. And so Vader Down to me suggests more of a grand gesture than the way I live my life. So I think a lot of the same results can be achieved in those little everyday things that you do, and that it's important to do those things, whether you're in a meeting recognizing somebody, whether you're coaching somebody, whether you're giving really honest feedback that maybe is not all that positive, but in the long run it's probably more helpful than not giving. And all of those things help people to lift themselves up. And it's true in your life, because it's true when you're helpful to your neighbors. It's true when you serve on organizations with that attitude. It's true in, any endeavor you do. It's really an attitude about being generous toward other people and knowing that there's nothing to be gained by not helping people. There's nothing to be gained by, just not giving someone a push when you're in a position to be able to do that. So that's how I think of it, because if I were to wait until I had the moment to truly help someone make, a big lift, I don't know when those moments are going to come. I don't know what that means. And so just as a life philosophy, it's like I'm not waiting to make the grand gesture. I want to do that on the everyday. And the everyday naturally implies small steps and small efforts. It's the nature of it, but that's how I do that, and that's what that means to me.
I like that. Thank you for sharing. So to wrap up today, Jennifer, if you summarized what we just spoke about in one key lesson, what would it be?
You really have to know yourself, know what you're interested in, know what excites you and energizes you, know that you're enough, in terms of cultivating that veneer of confidence that you're going to figure things out, you're going to uh, do what needs to be done in any given context, even when you're the person who's new at it. That is really the best advice. Nobody on this earth is like you. We truly are all unique, just incrementally. I mean, we're not all so different that it's crazy, but there is something to be said for the incremental uniqueness of us all. And that alone should propel people to to have the confidence to bring their best self forward and to know that you have something to contribute. So to really understand yourself and what it is that you want to do and can do, what you're in a position to do, that's really that's a lot harder than you think, and it's deserving of your time to take time to figure that out.
Thank you, Jennifer. I definitely heard, self-awareness and veneer of confidence. Both of those really stood out to me, and hopefully they'll stand out to our viewers here to really dig into those two things in their personal journey. So
I'm Jennifer Sweet, CEO of Aetna Better Health of Florida, and I'm sending the Vader back down.